Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Turkey. It's been bailed out more than a dozen times by the International Monetary Fund, but is now the second fastest growing G20 economy. As Turkey votes in a general election, we find out how it managed the turnaround. Also, the bill for tackling AIDS, high and getting higher, but how are rising food and fuel prices also affecting the fight? And the $25 billion video games markets will look at the battle of the brands as Nintendo tries to regain the upper hand. So a big focus on Turkey this week, what with the country's 17th general election taking place. And if you need an indication of why the AK Party's been so popular all this time, then look no further than the economy. The fastest growing economy in Europe, second fastest in the G20, second only to China. And all just 9 years after Ankara took in $16 billion from the world's lender of last resort, the International Monetary Fund. Turkey is a great success story, not without controversies, of course. We'll look at both sides this week with Mohammed Vala, a reporter in Istanbul.
Prime Minister Erdogan and his party fill the skies of Istanbul with their colorful banners. But it's their economic achievements that appear to be winning the hearts and minds of many voters in this country. Take Nizam, for instance, a barber who says Erdogan is not only a great and honest man, but that he's also succeeded in providing his people with necessities of life.
In the
past, we used to queue for gas, tea, sugar, but today you can buy as much as you want.
Or take this taxi driver, who says he's got a retirement for life, for no more than 3 or 4 little payments. Of course I'll vote for Erdogan, he says. Even Erdogan's political opponents do not deny the great economic leaps Turkey has made in his little less than 9 years in power. Between 2002 and 2010, Turkey's gross domestic product went up from $232 billion to $797 billion. GDP per capita increased from $3,500 to $10,000. Foreign direct investment went up from $1.1 billion to $9 billion. And Turkey seems to have begun to reverse its brain drain to the West.
Turkey right now is a country who is growing really fast, like 10 times faster than Spain. So I guess I have more opportunities here.
There are also high-level executives from Western Europe and beyond.
There is definitely a big growth in the number of executives applying for posts in Turkey, and that's of course partly related with the growth of the Turkish economy and partly related with the slowdown of the economies in Western Europe and United States.
A tunnel under the Bosphorus is such a grand idea. It is already underway behind me here. But what about a second Bosphorus Strait for Turkey? They call it Canal Istanbul, and many still believe it cannot happen. But for a better flow of maritime traffic, Prime Minister Erdogan is seriously considering the digging of a multi-billion-dollar waterway that could dwarf the Suez Canal. All of this, however, may not get Erdogan the supermajority he's craving, according to experts.
They will vote on the basis of economic performance, they are happy and all that. But at least 30-35% of the voters will still remain very skeptical, unhappy, and they won't vote for the AKP. There is also this peculiarly Turkish fear of a different agenda that AKP might have. If you look at the opposition, arguments, they are always emphasizing the authoritarian posture of the AKP.
Still, thanks to the economy, Erdogan is expected to sway some of those who used to vote against him on ideological grounds. But he wants more than a simple victory. That he takes for granted. What he wants is a sweeping parliamentary majority that will allow him to single-handedly change Turkey's constitution. Many Turks are unhappy with that prospect. Erdogan's hand is on his heart as he waits for the verdict of the ballot box on Sunday.
All right, joining us now from Istanbul is Ahmet Tonak. He is a professor of economics at Istanbul Bilgi University. Thank you for your time. So we focus so much on what's gone well in the last 9 years for the Turkish economy and the AK Party. I wonder, in your mind, what can we fault? What's gone wrong? Has anything gone wrong?
First of all, I think the overall global financial crisis affected Turkish economy as well, maybe not as severe as the other economies, and for obvious reasons for us, I mean, who follow Turkish economy closely. What I mean by that is essentially the Turkish economy experienced its own financial crisis in 2001. So it made, its own house cleaning at the time. And the second thing that I think the crisis, especially the financial aspect of it, was not as severe in Turkey because of the fact that we don't have the so-called derivatives and the like markets. So in that sense, we are quote-unquote underdeveloped. So that is the first point I would like to make in terms of the relatively less significant impact of global financial crisis. And then obviously we hear the news lately, Turkish economy recovered relatively quickly, especially in 2010, GDP growth being 8.9%. And so in that sense, I mean, we were both affected, not as severe as, the other countries, but at the same time, I think recovery was, substantial. However, we should explain and what caused that kind of recovery and whether it's sustainable or not.
Well, let me look at one element of that, and that is the housing side of things, because housing was a huge issue for countries in this economic crisis. And yet there is something I've been reading about called TOKİ, which is Turkey's Housing Development Administration, which gets people into houses and seems to have been a huge part of revitalizing the economy.
Yes, obviously housing had, positive impact on achieving, this kind of relatively substantial, growth rate. But beyond that, I think the personal consumption substantially contributed to this growth, and which is supported by a relatively easy credit policy of Turkish, banking system and Turkish government. And then secondly, and including, housing, I think private sector substantially increase its own investment capacity, and there was substantial investment with the hope that I think a special domestic consumption could be realized as high as it was, and then this investment I think produce the expected good results for the private sector. However, when you look at the GDP growth components and whether this is fully realized, and then you see that actually some of the produced goods unsold, so there is a stock change. So in that sense, I think whether this is sustainable and it will continue in 2011 and obviously 2012 is questionable.
This is one thing I was going to ask you about, the sustainability. When you've got 8.9% growth in the first place, that is a high rate to keep up with. Yeah. Plus, you've got a population that grows by about 1 million a year, so you've got to think about all the housing and the infrastructure and meeting the needs of that number of people.
You're right, and obviously, in order to sustain the major component of growth, which is personal consumption, including purchasing or renting this additional housing becoming available, and you need increase in real wages and salaries. And that, unfortunately, most of economists are not anticipating in the coming years. And the second thing is that the other component of GDP growth, which is private investment, needs ability to sell what they produce, including housing, but also the export capacity is sustainable or not. And as we all know that, I think Turkish economy is much more sensitive to the world market than, for example, China and India. Since major Western countries are not expecting full recovery in the sense that needing goods produced by economies like Turkey. And I think all of those things make us rather skeptical.
Is the Turkish model something you would almost promote for other countries?
Not necessarily.
The reason I'm saying that is just because, just by the numbers, it has been successful. We've established that by the numbers. Certainly, while the AK Party's been in, it's been successful. And I wonder if that's something others can look to.
I'm sure the economies in the region and maybe other the so-called third world countries look Turkey as an example, and then the model, whether repeatable or not. But as I implied, I think in order to have this economy sustain itself and sits on a kind of high growth rate, you have to have relatively reasonable income distribution and sustainable increase in wages, annual salaries, so that you have this private consumption aspect of it, personal consumption aspect of it, can go up year in, year out. And so, as you know, in Turkish economy, this is rather bumpy and fluctuating pattern. And also, you tightly connected to the world market in terms of export capacity. I guess it depends on one's expectation how world economy is going to behave next year or so. And so I guess all of those things determine whether you should take this as a model and repeat in your own country.
Ahmet Tonak talking Turkey with us this week on Counting the Cost. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
And still to come this week on Counting the Cost, Game On, why you should buy a Wii U instead of a PS or an Xbox at the E3. If you like video games, that might mean something to you. If not, stick around, we'll explain all. Right now, though, we just want to have a quick look ahead to where else in the world we'll be counting the cost this week. We'll look at China's huge investments in high-speed rail services. Big and really unprecedented protests in India against corruption as well. Also a case study from Kenya of the billion-dollar fight against AIDS on the 30th anniversary of its discovery. But before all that, OPEC and the worst meeting ever. It seems regional rivalries and long-standing divisions got the better of the oil-producing nation's cartel. It met in Vienna, nothing was achieved, and even the long-time kingpin Saudi Arabia was unable to lead or indeed strong-arm the other nations. More now from Jonah Hull, who was at that OPEC meeting.
With high oil prices threatening global economic recovery, all eyes were on the oil-producing cartel OPEC for decisive action to bring them down. But agreement proved elusive.
The reason that we are unable to reach a decision is because everybody has his own data. So we are unable to consolidate the numbers together, and we agree either we reduce or increase our production. But the atmosphere was really friendly,
That was not the signal markets had been looking for from the group that supplies around a third of the world's oil. In the short term, at least, prices will likely go up.
I think there are numerous of factors playing together. It's one, of course, the Arab Spring and the political events surrounding, but I think more so is the uncertainty, what is the oil market doing over the next month? Because we expect a strong increase in demand. Is this going to happen? And it's also the question, what is the world economy doing? What is the US doing? What is Europe doing? And all these factors play together, and all these factors have to be considered when OPEC makes a balancing decision.
Attention now turns to Saudi Arabia and its stated intent to pump more oil no matter what OPEC says.
OPEC's failure to reach agreement on an output rise highlights divisions between producing giants Saudi Arabia and Iran, among others. And it will not reassure consumer countries, particularly Western economies, who warn that high prices are stifling growth.
Current high prices come off the back of major change in the Middle East and North Africa, the region that holds two-thirds of the world's conventional oil reserves. Africa's third largest producer and fellow OPEC member, Libya, has seen its oil output reduced to a trickle by ongoing civil war. Continuing upheaval in Syria, in Yemen and elsewhere could yet have a knock-on effect. It's been a nervous 6 months, the chairman said at the outset. This meeting provided no relief.
It's 30 years now since the world first learned about AIDS, a deadly disease with over 7,000 new infections a day. Now, when you've got something that prolific, some serious money is involved, billions actually. According to a non-governmental campaign called AIDS 2031, the cost of caring for HIV patients in developing countries is about $13 billion a year. By 2031, that'll be up to $35 billion a year, and as much as $60 billion once we start factoring in rich nations. But think about the other end, those paying for the drugs. The cost can vary wildly. For example, in the US, AIDS patients are paying more than $20,000 a year. But those same drugs, thanks to cheap generics, cost $150 a year in poor countries. What if the medicine's not the real cost issue? Here's our case study, Kenya, with this report from Catherine Soy.
Mary Auma is still weak from childbirth. This 2-week-old baby is the latest addition to her 6 children. Mary is living with HIV, and the baby was a surprise to her and her HIV-negative husband, who has since abandoned his family. It's close to lunchtime, but the kitchen remains dry. There's no food for this family to cook.
I should provide for my children because I'm not lame, and I feel so bad.
But it's not only the nutrition of her children that she's worried about. Her status requires her to have a balanced diet and take her daily dose of antiretroviral drugs on a full stomach.
You've taken drugs, there is no food, so drugs are working, yet there is nothing inside. It is difficult. At times you faint. At the same time you are breastfeeding.
Mary's story is echoed by many other people living with HIV across the country, people who cannot afford to feed themselves, especially now when the cost of living is so high.
Rebecca Awiti, who works for an organization that deals with women with HIV in slums and rural areas, is concerned. She says that the rising food and fuel prices are hurting the fight against the disease.
So if this clan does not have food, they cannot take their medicines well. And then also there's the issue of getting new infections, because basically without food the immune system gets weaker.
Her organization provides 1 meal a day to orphans, including those living with the disease, and to adults who are too weak to fend for themselves. But there are many in Kenya who can't get such care, and for them, life will only get harder.
And on to India now, a campaign to stamp out corruption and bribery which is gathering unprecedented support. Because from the street beggar to the industrial tycoon, corruption is endemic in the country. But thousands of Indians are staging protests and sit-ins to demand those who steal from the public purse be held to account. Prerna Suri looks at this from New Delhi.
My name is Anil. I have paid bribe for my electric bill to be amended once.
My name is Kirti. I have paid bribe. I was driving and I was stopped by a cop. I was asked to pay 1,000, but I paid 200 and walked off.
Munawwar Ali naam hai mera. My name is Munawwar Ali. I only pay off traffic cops and traffic regulators.
Rich or poor, young or the old, paying a bribe is a common experience shared by many Indians. People here have realized that without money changing hands, nothing seems to get done. But corruption, which is prevalent in this country, isn't just limited to paying small bribes. It also runs right up to the top. Recent high-profile corruption scandals include the 2G scam, where mobile phone licenses were sold at cheap prices in exchange for kickbacks. That cost the country nearly $38 billion. And fraud allegations against some of the organizers of last year's Commonwealth Games has led to the jailing of several people, including government officials. It's this anger and frustration at a corrupt system that's giving rise to yet another anti-corruption protest. Here at Gandhi's memorial, Anna Hazare, a war veteran, is leading thousands on a hunger strike. They were denied permission to hold a protest at their usual spot, where back in April they led one of the biggest anti-corruption rallies.
Fasting isn't a crime, but despite this being a public right, the government is trying to strangle people. That is why, to protest against this atrocity, we are sitting on a fast here.
And his words are inspiring many people of all ages. This man, dressed as Gandhi and who's been at all the protests, says he's inspired by the uprisings in the Arab world.
My brothers from Tunisia got their freedom through their revolution. I'm sure if we all come together here in India, we can also get rid of our corrupt politicians.
It was Mahatma Gandhi who first popularized the idea of non-violent resistance, so it's no surprise that many people over here are drawing on his example. They say that they're fed up with corruption and that more needs to be done to tackle it. But the real question is anybody in the corridors of power actually listening to them, and will this bring about any real change?
Now, China's about to unveil the latest addition to its high-speed rail network, ultra-modern, ultra-fast trains that'll link Beijing and Shanghai, a mere 1,318-kilometre-long journey. Now, China's putting a lot of cash into this kind of thing. For example, in 2011, this is how much, $115 billion. And then this much, $430 billion in the 5 years to 2015. But here's another number, $300 billion, which is how much debt the ministry has. So to reduce operating costs and meet its target of carrying 80 million passengers a year, it's slashing ticket prices and train speeds. Andrew Thomas with more from Chuzhou in China.
The centrepiece of China's new high-speed train network on one of its final test runs. Its line, 1,300 kilometres long, has taken just 2 years to build. When the service opens later this month, it'll link the country's two biggest cities in record time.
In that direction is Shanghai, that way Beijing. At the moment, the journey by rail takes 10 hours. Along these tracks, the fast trains will do it in under 5.
This service is one that takes 22 hours. Even it's not that slow, which just shows how fast the new trains go. But tickets on them won't come cheap. Around $100 rather than the $30 these passengers pay. Not everything is as ready as the trains themselves. Chuzhou is one of the line's new stations. It's not quite finished. This, though, is China. Workers hopeful they'll have it done on time.
According to news, the line will open at the end of June. It's still being tested at the moment. We'll have our station ready by then.
One unfinished station, however, doesn't really compare to some of the other problems to have hit the line. Though fast, trains won't run as fast as originally planned, 300 kilometres an hour rather than the 380 kilometres an hour first promised. There's speculation a safety concern is behind the decision, but the government says slightly lower speeds are simply to reduce running costs and therefore fares. China's high-speed network is expanding at a record pace. The plan is to build over 15,000 kilometres of high-speed rail tracks by 2015, almost double the amount in operation at the end of last year. The price tag is huge. The rail ministry has debts of over $300 billion. In February, allegations of widespread corruption in awarding contracts cost the railway minister his job. For China, high-speed rail is an important symbol of modernity. The sheer pace of its development, though, brings growing pains.
And finally, a huge week for the world's top video game makers. It was the Electronic Entertainment Expo in Los Angeles. E3 is how the cool kids say it. And the big three, Sony, Nintendo and Microsoft, were all there trying to take a bigger bite out of a $25 billion a year market. Also there for us was Rob Reynolds.
The mutant humanoids are here, and so are 50,000 more or less human gamers, game developers, and industry executives, all attending E3, the video and computer game industry's annual get-together. For 2012, the $25 billion a year industry is getting back to its roots, with a focus on loud and violent action and military games.
This year, cute and fuzzy pets, hip-hop dancing, and guitar heroes are out. Shotgun blasts and bloodthirsty aliens are in.
Last year, the electronic entertainment industry's overall sales fell 5%. So the focus now is on die-hard customers, teenage boys and young men, who adore titles like Call of Duty, Halo, and World of Warcraft. Guys like Daniel Lockhart.
Don't have as exciting of a life as these video games, and it's really cool to throw myself into their personas and play as them, and I really enjoy it a lot.
Major developments in the game world include Microsoft's lineup of new games for its Kinect voice and motion sensing accessory for the Xbox 360. Over at Nintendo, a major announcement, the next generation Wii console. The traditional hand controller now sporting a 15-centimeter wide touchscreen that can augment or even replace a regular television monitor. And Sony showed off the successor to its aging PSP system called Vita. It will cost about $250 for the basic Wi-Fi version. Early reviews are ecstatic.
I really liked it a lot.
especially little deviants where I'm just going around like this, like trying to shoot things.
They may seem to inhabit a parallel universe, but for millions of players, electronic entertainment is much more than a game.
Whenever I'm not eating, sleeping, working, I'm playing games.
And that is about our lot for this week, but don't forget Counting the Cost online. You start at the main page at aljazeera.net/English and get here via the business tab. It's the Counting the Cost page where we put all our episodes in full for you to catch up on whenever you want. And then when you want to get in touch, you hop on Twitter and search for me at KamalAJE, where I post regular updates on the show. Do get in touch, always really good to hear from you. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.